Hello and welcome, listeners. Today, our guest is a true beacon of hope and inspiration, Alphonso Mayo, a first generation graduate and the tireless founder of Mentoring Mentors, who has devoted his life to empowering and shaping the leaders of tomorrow. With over a decade in youth development experience and as many years in public speaking, Mayo is a shining example of resilience, perseverance, and undying dedication. From his humble beginnings to being named a Baltimore Homecoming Hero and Baltimore Open Society Fellowship recipient, his journey is a testament to the transformative power of mentorship. Good morning, Mayo. Thank you so much for agreeing to be part of my Slice of Mentorship podcast.
Thank you for having me. I genuinely appreciate this opportunity.
So we've had a few prior conversations, and there is a lot to your life story. And I want to ask, how did your early life experiences share your determination to start mentoring mentors?
Well, I would like to believe that I knew what I would be doing prior to even launching Mentor Mentors. And I say that because in high school, we had something called like electives. Because I was an athlete, and a standout athlete, people thought that I would just do like auto mechanic because it's more masculine. Uh, but something told me like choose early childhood education. Mainly me looking at the girls, but being a part of that field really um, helped me understand the importance of early childhood education. The first 5 years, um, I was abandoned by my parents as an infant, and I knew some of the traumas and pain that I had felt growing up, and I knew that I wanted to help eliminate that. Also, in my early high school years, I became a tutor to first and second graders. Even though I couldn't read and my writing skills was very low, those young people really helped teach me the language of reading. And if it wasn't for them, I would have probably never graduated. And I wound up graduating in the top 10% of my class because of that experience. And I knew then that I would just dedicate my life to youth development. I didn't necessarily know that it would be through mentorship or mentoring mentors. I thought it would be through, coaching sports, et cetera. But then when I also kind of look at my family dynamics, I've been doing this type of work for my younger cousins for as long as I could remember, just trying to be the example of what we didn't have to be. Uh, Given our like family circumstances and dynamics in the city that we grew up in. And so I was always trying to be uh, exemplary or just different than where we grew up. And so it was an easy choice. Once I graduated, I coached football, and that led me to launching Mentor Mentors. And I think had it not been for those experiences, I probably would be someone different. Um, but this is just who I am. This is what God created me to do. And it's just the right thing to do. So,
Thank you for sharing a little bit of your story. And let's delve into the mentors piece for a bit. So could you talk a little bit about the overall organization and then who is involved in the whole mentoring mentors process?
well, first and foremost, our mission is to create the next generation of community leaders. Is my belief and our belief that everyone is a leader in their own right. And it's our goal to help young people identify what leadership is to them. But most importantly, we believe the leadership is about discipleship, each one teaching one and lifting each other up and encouraging one another. There's a great quote from Dr. King that talks about, designing a blueprint for your own somebodyness and own worth. And so that's first and foremost. And so our program is designed to teach young people the importance of believing in themselves and then encouraging them and shaping them through leadership development to give back to their younger peers. And so we designed something called the intergenerational near-to-peer model. Initially when we started, it was more about adults serving young people. but we realize that young people have a greater influence on young people. And so we focus on positive peer pressure. And so we could definitely be quantified as a youth-led organization. We have a very small team currently because we are really intentional about our work. And so we work on average about 25 to 30 students, which just means that we recruit individuals that can be intentional about their relationship. So we don't necessarily have what I would consider like a 9 to 5 uh, or drop in. Our work is daily. It's as needed. Um, we utilize our platform to help create families. Essentially, we work with kids who come from single family households or come from communities that's disinvested. They go to schools that don't necessarily have the resources to provide the exposure they need to really help them manifest the type of leadership skills that we believe are internal and inside of them. And so we become like their family. And so again, we do a lot of deep work. We have our, somebody I always say is like the female version of me, Alexandra Port, who is our program director. We have Yvonne Waller, who is our administrative assistant. We have an amazing graphic designer, Rob Wesley, and we have photographer Naaman Brown. But most of our leaders are youth leaders. And then our board is led by Dr. Damon Smith, who is relatively new, but also share the same sentiments. And one thing that's unique about our organization is that most of the individuals, even though we have different life experience, we have shared life experience. And so the work is very meaningful, and that keeps us grounded. And we always look for community partnerships at local colleges and universities because we want our kids to know, even though they go to certain schools or schools that are not thriving, you can be in this position. You just have to surround yourself in those environments. And so that kind of helped us really reimagine our work. And so we're in a process of relaunching and rebranding because we want to serve more students. And this year we'll be graduating our first cohort of students who went from 6th to 12th grade. And so I'm extremely excited about that.
I want to kind of move down a little bit from this high level of the organization to a more tangible way to understand what you do. So let's take the experience of a kid. Like, how old is this kid? How do they get into your program? How long is their experience in the program? And what are their weekly or monthly interactions look like?
Yeah, yeah.
About this.
So for young people, we engage our youth in 6th grade. We identify local elementary middle schools here in Baltimore. Most of our schools are elementary middle schools. We don't have a lot of just standalone middle schools like we used to when I was growing up. And so we, in Baltimore, they have like a report card. So each school has a single report card. And we always look for the schools that are operating in between a D and F. And we go to those schools and we engage the leadership of those schools and counselors of those schools and teachers. And we request students who essentially were a younger version of myself, students who are performing low academically, students who are disconnected or struggling to build positive peer relationships, students who come from families who might face financial hardship or some form of trauma. And that trauma can be defined in a multitude of ways. But the school, because they work with them from 1st grade through 5th grade, they have some formalities and knowledge of this student need help. And the reason we integrate ourselves in their life in middle school is because it's very pivotal. It's not the highest point because it's not high school, but it's not the lowest point. It's not elementary school. It's really when you start to formulate your social circles. And most adults know that we are who we hang around. And because middle schoolers, there's like this area of gray. They're not too far left, too far right, but you want to give them the option to start shaping their personality and qualities. And so when we go in, we ask for those kids, and most schools identify 100 kids who are falling below those criteria, who are failing tremendously, who are considered disruptions. And so we engage them and we let them know, like, hey, this is a 7-year journey. We're going to be with you from 6th grade through 12th grade. And most people say that's 6 years, but it's really not. Like when you look at the years and the summers that you spend with them. Uh, but we are also aware that all students won't finish. And that's the key point. We know that some students, it will go from 6th through 8th grade and they'll go off to high school and, we provided them with the tools to help shape leadership and better decision making. But essentially, what we look for is students who can go from 6th through 12th grade, who can do year-round programming. And what does that look like? So doing middle school and 6th grade, that's in-school mentorship. So we come to the schools, we take up an elective program like music or gym, and we spend an intense hour just teaching them self-development skills. Why are you making these choices? Do these choices serve you? With some form of academic support. So we offer tutoring to those young people. And the goal is just to see small increase. Maybe most of our students might come to us with a 0.9 or 1.0 or something like that. But if we can get them to a 1.2 or 1.3, we want them to transition into our community-based program, which is 3 times per week, usually, like a Monday, Tuesday, and a Thursday. And that's from 7th through 12th grade. And that's where we take young people to local colleges and universities, and we do our social development and leadership development, where young cute students are interacting with high school students. And a lot of it is team building. The curriculum is really driven by what we quantify as leadership development, but that can be, taking on new skills, learning new skills, new industries, connecting with different community partners, so motivational speakers or leaders from different organizations, and then community service. Again, we're trying to train the next generation of community leaders, so community service is always embedded in our work. And then once you get in high school, it kind of transitioned from a lot of the social skills to leadership and helping identify what your path forward will look like. So in the summer, we introduce our young people to internships and the traits that they have identified. So it can be information technology, it can be the medical field, it can be interior design, et cetera. And we pay them to partner with local communities. And then we call it, again, leadership development, because in order to qualify for those careers, you have to come to a camp and you have to serve younger students as like camp counselors. And we take them on field trips that typically in urban communities or Black communities are just non-existent, right? So no one does zip lining, no one does kayaking, no one does whitewater rafting, no one does hiking. So we take them on these field trips to really help challenge them, really to help them overcome fear of the unknown, because these are activities that their families wouldn't usually take them on to do. And then also in high school, we introduce them to college tours. And so we do what we consider cross-country college tours, taking them to 10 universities in various sizes, HBCUs, predominantly white institutions and multicultural institutions, so that they can really start to feel what it's like to have choice. What we realize is leadership is about choice. And again, because we're all leaders, some leaders just choose the wrong things and some leaders choose the right things, but ultimately really helping them massage and be exposed to what the future could be like, all while teaching the younger students not to make some of the choices that they made while they was in middle school. And then we really go into intensive care, which is very new to our organization. We've been doing it for about 3 years, is where we'll invite young students into our homes who might be struggling at home. And so we'll pretty much take on like the parental role, just bringing them in a different environment where they can just be kids. I think in youth development, a lot of times we forget the element that these are still children, and most of the children we serve don't have the opportunity to just be children. And so when we invite them into our homes, it's where they have an opportunity not to worry about, babysitting or any parental responsibilities, because they come from homes that are broken. And we watch how they develop and thrive just being a kid. It's things that they get a chance to do that sometimes it doesn't happen in their current home environment doesn't make it good or bad. It just means that we want to give them an intentional break so that they can really focus on their mental health. And so that's pretty much how we operate. So we have, the school base, we have the community base, we have the summer, we have the college tours. Those are like our core programs. And it's really about touch points and consistency. And so we try our best to show up. Our last year program, we did 133 days during the school year. And the summer program is 5 times a week for 6 weeks. And so we really try to spend a large amount of time with our students to really help shape their mind and decision making, but even more importantly, help them cultivate the relationships with their peers. Because again, young people have greater influence on young people. And so
Thank you so much for giving this very textured picture of what your actual work looks like. And to me, I'm looking at through the lens of an organizational building, or like if your nonprofit is a startup, there is a business model that you're executing. And from what you were saying, it looks like there are a million pieces involved. Like every single program, starting from selection of students or partnering with those schools, to getting them to those classes, then managing the curriculums of those classes, then organizing all those field trips, managing like logistics of each of them. Like how exactly does your model work organizationally to manage all the complexity?
Well, in the beginning, it was just me trying to figure it out, right? So because I am a founder, and it wasn't like something I was grandfathered in, we didn't really have the systems. And so you talk about 4 or 5 years of just making endless mistakes. But I also know that leadership is about serving with a purpose and just not like having a passion for sure, but being purposeful, making sure that even when you make mistakes, you're doing it with the best intent. And so I spent a long time, like literally 5 or 6 years, just kind of making mistakes. And then I realized that in our model, the best thing was to identify community partners where we didn't have to do all of the work. And then also developing and designing your team. So I have this saying that, one man can change the world, but he won't do it alone. And, for uh, people who have, religious beliefs, no leader did it by themselves. They either had disciples or they had, people who had stewardship. And so really what it has become is a shared responsibility for a greater impact. And so our schools is equally responsible for our young people outcomes as we are. Our parents are equally responsible for their kids' attendance as we are, et cetera. But from an operational standpoint, I'm a visionary. And so you have to be careful being a visionary because you'll take on too much. And so I want to say this year I have been intently focused on, hey, this is our mission. How do we operate in a way where we're focused on our mission and vision and not, just doing a bunch of things just to say we're doing it. And so we have what I consider like the 3 focuses. And so we have exposure, right? And we have leadership development and social development. None of our programs operate outside of those frameworks. And so that's how we kind of quantify like, well, how many students can we recruit? And again, it's all based upon, retention of staff and community partnerships and mentors, et cetera. But we won't do something where we're like overly stretching ourselves thin because that's how we used to operate. And so having like myself and Alex as the leaders, it really helped us divvy up the work. So divide the work. How we build our staff is we work with the local colleges and universities as a continuum to our near to peer model. So we recruit all college students who are still relatively young, who are eager to learn, and most of the colleges require hands-on experience. And some of those are paid internships, and some of them are just volunteer hours. And so we've identified the universities that really fit with our unique niche to help build capacity. And then we do a lot of in-house training, but then we look for external training and trauma-informed care because a lot of our work is responsive, even though a lot of our work is proactive. But we realize that by the time students come to us, they've already been exposed in so some traumatic experiences, which is why they're candidates for our program. And then from the like, so my focus is fundraising. Like my goal is to raise all of the money, and I'm still learning in that skill, but that's my core job. A lot of the curriculum came from my life experience, and so we kind of perpetuate those. But then we also take a lot of our youth voice. We ask them do surveys and do questionnaires and do one-on-one, uh, call them interviews, but it's really not. It's just us building relationships, what work and what don't work, and so that helps inform and shape programming. And then funding is critical. So funding also shape what we can and can't do. Uh, and so that from the organizational side, I would say that, as a leader, you wear like a multitude of hats. Uh, but what I've learned is that shared responsibility is the best responsibility. And so we're still building our team. Like we're not nearly where I want us to be, but our small team have direct roles to help alleviate what I used to do. So the scheduling is not my responsibility. That's something that Alex, she does with Miss Yvonne, and they schedule all the speakers and all of the school visits, et cetera. And so it's just helpful to have a team, especially like when you're a young grassroots organization. A lot of us believe that I have a new saying, if the program starts and stop with you, it's not a program. Because programs should be able to move, right? Like Chick-fil-A is an organization. They're all over the country because it doesn't stop and start with one person. And so that's pretty much how we look at our operations. And then we're governed by our board of directors. Um, and our board of directors, if you just kind of look at their executive experience, have well over 20 years in executive experience. Many are entrepreneurs in their own right. So they developed and designed startup for profits. And they're kind of learning the traits of a nonprofit. And so they really help me think strategically and long term, while my program staff help me do the day-to-day work.
It makes a lot of sense, the picture you are describing. In terms of the vision, you mentioned you are the visionary of the organization. Can you share some books or resources that truly influenced your perspective on leadership, community building, or mentorship?
I have two number ones. I know people will say that's ridiculous, but I do. I have two number ones that kind of shape my perspective. So the first one is called Wholeness by Toure Roberts. He's a pastor, and he number one, I believe, like, so wholeness is an encompass peace and dealing with your brokenness. I believe that most people who start something, especially in the social sector, is because you dealt with something and you're trying to address an eternal issue. But it's really hard to address it if you don't fix your brokenness. And so wholeness is my go-to. And then The Alchemist. Oh my goodness, The Alchemist. I read many years ago. I've read like three times, but I read many years ago. Um, and that book really helps you stay the course, understanding that the vision that is given to you, it exists, and it might be as close as the treasure was under the tree. But sometimes you have to go out to be, reeled in to your destiny. So those are like my two number one books. And then I love Tyler Perry. It's called Higher is Waiting. Um, that's more like his life story and resilience. Then you have The $1 Million Identity by Jamie Wolf, which talks about, it's like visualization, seeing yourself before you become what you ultimately have to become in order to do. Um, and then I have Striving by Perfection, which one of my mentors wrote, which is an amazing book. And then The Other Westmore. And you might say, well, what does these books have to do, with mentorship and who you are? And then lastly, The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. Yeah, Ryan Holiday. And essentially, I read a multitude of books that, one, help me shape my personal development, but also encompass my leadership development. And I don't think that you can be a good leader without first identifying like your personal development, looking in the mirror every day saying, hey, am I the best version of myself? And am I a better version of myself than yesterday? And these books help me think about these things, right? Because a lot of the um, language in these books uh, really just help you think about where you are. And some of them are life stories and how people, overcame their past. Like The Other Westmore was one of the first books I read in college. And just an amazing story about somebody having the same name as an individual, but one went to prison for life, and one is now the mayor of Maryland, right? Two different stories, but the same name, right? And it just was the choice, right? The choices that they made. And so I always think about that. And I think the most pivotal book that I've ever read was called Never Die Easy. It was a book about Walter Payton and his life story. And that was one of the first books that I've ever read. And I haven't read it since high school, but I can still almost remember every chapter because it talked about his character. And so most of the books that I read are about character, personal development, which leads to leadership development. And how that helps me is because I'm human, right? I have emotions and feelings, and I have trials and tribulations. And being a leader of a Black-led organization, it's really hard. Like a lot of times, because you can see what you want it to be, right? Like I can see us opening up a school. I can see young people leading other young people. I can see a thriving community. I can see people being healed from traumatic experiences and loving on each other and encouraging one another, which is quite different than what we see in my city today. But I can see it. And painful reality is I can feel it, but it hasn't happened. And it's human nature to start questioning why isn't it happening? Or, I don't have the resources currently to make it happen. And that feeling of, wanting to just give up and do something different, that temporary satisfaction of like, man, it might not happen. Like we all have those thoughts. But these books really helped me stay grounded because every last one of these leaders dealt with the same challenges, almost identical, especially in the Alchemist, right? Like he lost everything, but still found his treasure. And because I believe that I'm on a journey to finding, my treasure, I don't think there's an end in sight for me. I just think there's a being for our work. Um, I'm going to just chart the course because I have other leaders who also chart the course. And so, those are the books that really help me like really, really shape, myself. So
I love your answer and how you weave the vision that the books give you of where you want to be and also the grounding that they provide. I think that's really powerful. Thank you so much for sharing those books. You kind of give me goosebumps to go and look a few of them up on Amazon. This is awesome. So you mentioned that some of the books uh, you read while still in college before starting mentoring mentors. So I wanted to come back to the beginning when you have read a book or a couple of books that make you feel this gap that you want to bridge and you want to do something. And there are a lot of people like that who are in the same space right now. So what was the biggest challenge you faced when you started working on mentoring mentors, and how did you overcome that challenge?
oh man. So the biggest challenge was not even knowing that I was starting something. So I think that's the biggest challenge because I didn't know that I was starting a nonprofit. I had no knowledge of nonprofit work. I just wanted to do good work, right? And essentially, how I got to mentor mentors was, again, like I live in Baltimore City, and one day was working my overnight job, and I just did some research, and I was looking at the death toll, and I was looking at the age range, and I want to say about 85% was people 23 and younger, and I started to cry, and I thought to myself, I'm coaching football and I'm trying to help these young people out. But coaching isn't the end all be all. So what can I do? So I started to actually apply to other organizations. Other like I just Googled best mentoring organizations in, Baltimore. Started filling out applications and I didn't get any response. I mean, I didn't get rejected, but I didn't I just didn't get a response. And so my response to not getting a response was like, hey, I'm just try this. I want to teach young people how to serve community. Because in my community, what I was seeing, especially young men, I was seeing young men destroy community, but I didn't know how I was going to teach them. So I just figured the best way to do it is just to do. And so, hey, let's clean up the community. Let's clean up the parks. Let's go help someone else. Um, I heard this saying, by helping others get what they want, you ultimately get what you want. And so I felt like, hey, let's just go help others and see what relationships we will build and, you know, what networks we can create. And I just didn't know it was a nonprofit. So I didn't raise any money. I wasn't even trying to raise money. I just wanted to do. And sometimes when you do without a plan of action, um, you never know the results that you're going to get because you're not aiming at anything, you're just doing. And so I did that for maybe like a year or two. And when I realized that a lot of my time was being consumed and pouring into these young men, and I wasn't being compensated for it, or we weren't being compensated for it, I was working, 2 full-time jobs to supplement for the work that I was doing with them. And eventually that caught up with me. And you might say, well, what does that mean? I was behind on, my bills. I was just behind trying to serve. And I wound up losing a lot of things because of that. Just the lack of knowledge, I didn't have a mentor or anybody to say, hey, this is what you're doing and this is what you should do. And this is how you should plan and this is how you should budget and this is the systems. So I had no knowledge of that. And that was a real big challenge, but my heart was always in the right place. And even though I was losing things, I was seeing our young people accomplish some amazing feats, and I held on to that. And eventually, you take enough bumps, you'll start to say, all right, well, let me put these things in the system. And there's something in the word that says, write the plan and make it plain. And so I started to write down what we wanted to do and where we wanted to go and some of our goals. And it kind of started off small and then it turned into like a logic model and a theory of change and all of that unique stuff that come with like a business and then essentially like a business plan. And now we're in the process of a strategic plan and I'm thinking about a succession plan and things like that. But ultimately, the biggest challenge was just kind of doing what was naturally inside of me, which is talent. But I now believe and I know that skill outweigh talent, right? And so now I'm more skillful in our approach, right? You have systems and accountants and, lawyers and, record keeping. But that was the biggest challenge, man. Uh, but I never really like wavered. I think the thing that always keep me is the fact that I never wavered despite the challenges, right? I see a lot of people start and not finish. You remember in my earlier conversation, I said when we get students, I let them know that, many of you guys started, but everybody won't finish because one of the things that is just, it happens. I don't know how it happens is that we lose a sense of our commitment and dedication. And then we start questioning the journey that we're on. I think for me, because of my growing up in my life, it's almost impossible for me to stop doing what I commit myself to. Like once I make a commitment, that's it. It's kind of all she wrote. And so I've been doing this long enough to know, man, like anything is really possible. And because I now have systems in place, I'm not going to say that I operate our systems the best because I'm still learning. And that's another thing that I think was a mistake is that I didn't know how to learn in the beginning. And now I know what to look for. So if I don't know, I try to learn it. and then I try to find like a mentor or coach to help me execute it. And so uh, I learned how to raise money, um, and I learned how to support this work. And so I haven't had a 9 to 5 or a supplement job since 2018. So I've just been doing this every day, just waking up, you know. And I remember the first dollar I raised. I remember feeling this sense of gratitude because somebody was buying into my dream and my vision, because we don't have a product to give them, right? Uh, and I realized that, I could get multiple people to buy into this dream and vision to make this city a better place, to make Maryland a better place, and ultimately this country a better place. And so,
This is a great story. One thing that I wanted to kind of dig into a little bit, you mentioned that you didn't, when you started, you didn't know that you were starting, you were like acting. And I'm a big believer in certain points when there is no clarity, you create clarity by doing. Like
mhm.
you do things, it creates a little bit of structure, and then you can start making sense of it. But I guess if you were to give advice to someone who is in your position, when is the right point in doing to stop and to start thinking about what you are doing?
I think when you start to feel this like sense of resistance, so like you're doing something, but it feels heavier than it should feel, right? So like for me, I started to feel like in the beginning it felt like this great blessing, but then it started to feel burdensome because I wasn't able to meet, my needs, right? I wasn't taking care of certain responsibility, but I didn't pivot to plan. It just was like, well, if I do, then I'll eventually get there. But I didn't. So essentially, um, do as much as you can until you feel that I can't do it, right? Like we all have like that internal innate can't do this without losing something. And if you feel like you have to lose something or sacrifice something, then you've done too much. Because ultimately, you shouldn't have to sacrifice your being for a greater calling. No, you are a part of the greater calling. And without you, the calling doesn't exist. And I think I wasn't aware of that. And so what I would say is, yes, do. But if it start to stretch you, if it start to pull you, you might want to reconsider what you're doing so that you can actually start to plan. And, I equate it to like lifting weights, right? You might can lift 315, right? But I think that if you start with that, you'll realize that you'll hurt yourself. So you might want to start slow. And then when you start to feel the resistance, slowly increase and then start to plan your workouts, um, so that you don't lose a sense of yourself. So,
I love how practical this is. So thank you for sharing. And it does resonate with me because I'm often like that. I might push too far with some initiative. And this seems pretty intuitive, but hard to implement when you have to like realize that this is hurting me and not helping the overall cost. So thank you for
yeah.
sharing. I wanted to, you mentioned this near to peer model briefly, and maybe you
Mhm.
could talk a little bit about what it is, and perhaps if there is a success story you could share of how this model created
Works.
true
Yeah.
works and created true impact.
In 2015, um, we were an organization that solely focused on high school male athletes to serve community, because there's something about being an athlete that people just feel, right? Um, but in our work of service, we were serving middle schoolers, and that was a very challenging time for Baltimore. We was having something called the Baltimore Uprise. Our city was really on fire, especially the community in which I grew up in. I grew up on a street where all of this took place, and it was a lot of high school students during the uprising. They was looting and setting fires, but my group of young men were serving. And at the end of that year, I asked them what was, the best community service opportunity, and they stated working with middle schoolers because they felt like leaders, they felt heard, and they was able to help promote the positive side of the uprise. Uh, and I was like, man, like what could we call that? And one of my students, William Fernandez, was like, when they're not our peers, so it's not peer to peer, it's near to peer. And I was like, near to peer, I ain't never heard of that. And that's when I realized that it's a near to peer model because you're taking students in high school to train students in middle school. And the students in high school ultimately have an understanding of what it's like to complete middle school. And they, even, good, bad, or indifferent, they have some sense that they can pour into that young person. And essentially what it is just it's helping young people build their personal development and social development in middle school. And then in high school, focus on their leadership development so that they can give back. Because we have a belief that all good leaders serve, right? When you look at all great leaders just across this country and this world, they all serve. And it can be good and bad, but I'm talking about the good ones, right? They all served people. And so it's pretty much like a training mechanism in which we hope that most young people will embody, especially the ones who come from broken families and broken communities, because it's their way of creating the community and family that they desire. And they're the leader of it. And so essentially it's training our young people to build positive relationships and to commit to those positive relationships. Because when I look at the deficit, a lot of times it's because people walked out of their lives, fathers walked out of their lives. And so it's like, hey, if you can commit to this 7 years, right? It's just a continuum of what life will be when you make a commitment to your wife and you make a commitment to your career and you make a commitment to your children. And that's ultimately our model. And there's not a lot of research on it because we're going to be the organization that help establish and build the data. But the best success story actually came this year. So this year we had a young man become a 4.0 student. He was the first 4.0 student in our program. And in high school, there's a shift for our young men. Usually in middle school, they're struggling and the females are dominating academically. But in high school, the males rise to the challenge and now they're dominating academically. Our young ladies are still doing well. But this one young man, once he reached a 4.0 and he talked about it, his peers started to say, I can do it too. And next thing you know, the next young student got it. And then the next one was like, man, if they're doing it, I can do it. Because again, they have the ability to influence each other like no other. No tutor has that ability, no teacher, and not even parents. And next thing you know, we have students walking around with a 4.0, and that's the topic of discussion. Not because of something we're saying, but something that they're influencing. And so last year we had 5 young men reached the 4.0 mark. And that's
Wow.
big. That's big because that's going to open up doors and opportunities that they don't even know exist right now. But I, as the leader and parents, know college is going to see that and going to say, man, like this person is invested in themselves. And so I'm super grateful for that. And then and even more importantly, the first student that I ever started with, I told him that he will work with students, and he told me he wouldn't because he had a dream of going to the NFL. And today he's a teacher. He's a mentor in our program. He's a boxing coach, and he's a father of 2 beautiful daughters. And when I think about what his story could have been and should have been, it's not. And so I just look at how that impact, like they see him operating in that space because he too believes in that intergenerational near to peer model. So
Thank you. That's a truly inspiring story. And I also noted that the name came from an actual person who was part of the program. And I feel this is
yeah, it's not something I thought of. It was,
very cool.
I don't know what made him say it, but I'm grateful that he did.
I have one last question for you, which is I know there's a lot going on in your world, But if you could name one initiative or one project that excites you the most about the next 6 to 12 months, what would it be?
One project. So we have something. So remember earlier I told you that while we don't share this or talk about it much, having students live in our homes and really helping them just focus on being children. And so a few years ago, Alex and I, we started designing something called Brave House.
Hmm.
Get it? Brave House is where you can be brave enough to be a kid. And so we're currently putting together a team to help us understand what a brave house would look like. Because we believe that families are really trying their best, especially some of the families we serve, but they don't always have the outlets or resources. And so what we want to do is we want to work collectively with their parents by helping their parents find the resources to help them with their social emotional development, with career development, with their education attainment, while simultaneously working with their students in a residential program where they can just be kids. They can focus on school. They can come to the after school program. They can do the summer program and it be thoughtless. And we don't want to be like a group home or anything like that. It's not foster care or anything like that because we're not removing them from their family. We're just taking the responsibility of being a parent so that their parent can have breathing room to become a better version of themselves. Because we believe that, our children are like seeds and the family is the soil. And so we want the soil to be better so that those seeds can grow to its fullest potential. And so I'm super excited about what that will look like. I know that it's going to help shape our organization identity. And it's going to help us go deeper. And so I'm just extremely excited about that. And on a personal side, I just finished my book about my life. It's
Wow.
called The Promise. It's called The Promise. And it's a story about like resilience. Most people might think it's about trauma, but it's really about overcoming trauma despite, the circumstances, and finishing what you started. And so I'm super excited about those two projects.
And both projects are very inspiring. And about the book, has it been published?
No, so we're actually in our first stage of editing. I finished it like 3 weeks ago, but it's been something that I've been working on since 2015. And I stopped and started, but ultimately it was really about getting it finished this year. It's a perfect time, given the fact that we're in our remodel, reimagining, and relaunching stage. And as a leader, I'm reimagining what my position and work look like because I'm not going to be as hands-on or boots on the ground, but leading the organization. And so it's a really good time for us.
Thank you so much, Mayo, for all the great work that you're doing in this community and the inspiration that you're sharing. And hopefully, we were able to unpack in this conversation.
No, thank you again for the opportunity. I hope that any person listening to this, any leader, any entrepreneur, social entrepreneur can take from this. Again, I know 45 minutes, 50 minutes is not a lot of time, right? But I hope that they can really take from this and say, hey, I can do this, I can do this work and that they bet on themselves because I want them to know they're the right person for it, even when you don't know what you're doing, do until you feel that resistance and then start planning.
So
Okay.
if somebody wants to learn more about you, your work, perhaps support it or reach out, how can they do it?
Well, thank you for asking that. I think the easiest way to connect with me is always going to be through social media. So I just started my speaking page at Mayo Speaks on Instagram. And then my personal page is at Mayo_Mayo. And so that's a way to kind of keep following my work and then my life. My work and my life is just intertwined. I am who I am. The platform that I utilize the most frequently is LinkedIn. And so you can just search my name, Alphonso Mayo. There's not a lot of Alphonso Mayos in this world, was which I learned. And so I usually pop up at the top. And then you can always directly email me. And so my business email is my full name, Alphonso Mayo, at mentoring-mentor. So if you want to learn more about the mentoring organization, you go through that platform. We haven't launched my personal website just yet, but if people are on LinkedIn or Instagram, I'll be revealing like my personal website in a short few weeks. So,
Well, folks, as we wrap up this engrossing conversation with Alphonso Mayo, it's evident that his passion for youth development is an inspiration to us all. From a first-generation student to a change-maker in youth mentoring, Alphonso's journey teaches us that with determination and compassionate heart, we can truly make a difference. This is your host, Igor Gorlatov, founder of Traction 5. Remember, our mission is to empower you with a key to impactful mentorship, promoting corporate innovation and startup growth through our data-driven SaaS platform. Let's continue to create transformative mentorship experiences.